The desperate refugees cried out for anyone to save them, their last shred of hope fading away as the Kelmthar raider ships destroyed their convoy ship by burning ship. Captain Charles Johnson gripped the command console on the bridge of the UNS Relentless as the distress call blared over the speakers. The outer reaches of human space were under his patrol and protection. This grizzled veteran had been shaped by loss and grief, his wife and unborn daughter murdered by pirates years ago, their deaths driving him to defend the innocent. He would not let more innocents die today. Set an immediate course for that distress beacon. Ready fighters and marines for rescue operations. Looks like these Elysian refugees wandered too close to raider territory, poor bastards. We'll show these raiders what happens when you attack civilians near human space. Let's move, people. Double time. Prep for FTL jump on my mark. The crew scrambled to action stations, and within minutes the Relentless rocketed out of FTL speed into a scene of utter devastation. Burning ships, escape pods under fire, grisly alien body parts floating in the void. The bridge went silent except for the sporadic crackle of flames flickering on view screens. They were too late for most. Charles's jaw clenched as he activated fleet-wide comms. All ships, weapons free. Let's send these bastards straight to hell. Charles walked into the conference room where High Counselor Zephyr and the other Elysian leaders waited. The elegant grey-skinned aliens carried themselves with poise despite their ragged appearance. Zephyr stepped forward, his robes tattered, but his eyes sharp. Captain Johnson, words cannot express our gratitude for your timely intervention. You saved many lives today. Charles nodded. I only wish we could have gotten there sooner. Too many innocents died before we arrived. Zephyr's face fell. The fault is ours. We knew the risks of settling so close to Kelmthar space, but we had nowhere else to go. Our people were once part of a great interstellar republic, you see, but the Kelmthar conquered us centuries ago, enslaving our people and stripping our worlds of resources. Charles's brow furrowed. I've never heard of these Kelmthar before. They sound like real pieces of work. They are a vicious, warlike race that exists only to dominate others. We lived under their boot heels for generations, until recently. A fire sparked in Zephyr's eyes. We rose up and overthrew the local garrisons, then fled in whatever ships we could scrape together. We seek a new home beyond their reach, where our people can be free. About that, Charles reached into his pocket and retrieved the strange metal cube. One of your people, an engineer named Tharos, gave me this before he died. He seemed to think it was important that I have it. Zephyr accepted the cube, turning it over in his long-fingered hands. His eyes widened with recognition. This is a hollow recording device, may I? At Charles's nod, Zephyr set the cube on the table and tapped a series of nodes. A flickering blue hologram of an aged Elysian male sprang to life, his face worn but determined. To any who find this recording, the hologram spoke in accented but clear English, I am Tharos Vin, an engineer of the Elysian people. If you are watching this, then our uprising against the Kelmthar has likely forced us to flee our homes. Tharos went on to explain how he and other Elysians had secretly prepared a hidden colony called New Elysia, stocked with supplies where their people could live free of the Kelmthar. The cube contained the coordinates. Please, Tharos pleaded, his voice raw with emotion, if you have any decency, guide my people to safety. Help us complete our journey. The Kelmthar cannot discover New Elysia's location, or all our sacrifices will be for nothing. You are our only hope. The message ended and the hologram faded. Zephyr looked to Charles, a desperate hope in his eyes. Charles felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He couldn't consign the Elysians to death and subjugation, not when he had the power to help. But he knew he couldn't make this decision alone. Counselor Zephyr, you have my deepest sympathies for what your people have endured. I want to help, but I need to talk to my superiors. Taking a UNS battleship off patrol is above my pay grade. Give me one moment. Charles strode over to the wall console and initiated a secure channel to Arcturus Station. The stern face of Admiral Hawkins appeared on the display. So, Captain Johnson, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. What's the situation out there? Sir, I know this is irregular, but I'm requesting permission to escort a fleet of alien refugees outside UNS territory. Hawkins' eyebrows shot up. Come again, Captain. Since when do we get involved in the business of foreign powers? Since we became the only thing standing between a people and their annihilation, Charles said firmly. He quickly summarized the Elysians' plight and the coordinates from the cube. Sir, if we don't help them, the Kelmthar will wipe them out. Every man, woman, and child. I've seen the brutality the Kelmthar are capable of firsthand. We can't let that happen again. Hawkins was silent for a long moment. You're asking me to approve an unsanctioned operation that could be seen as a treaty violation at best and an act of war at worst if it becomes public knowledge. The folks back home wouldn't be too happy. Then we keep it quiet, Charles pressed. The Elysians are no threat to us. They just want to live in peace, and they've already got a colony set up. They just need guides and protection to get there. I'm asking for 30 days, tops. The Admiral heaved a sigh, rubbing his forehead. Damn it, Johnson, you don't make things easy. But you've never steered me wrong before. You've got 30 days to get those Elysians to their new home. But this stays completely off the books, understand? The Elysians' existence is classified at the highest levels. Understood, sir, and thank you. Don't make me regret this. Hawkins out. The screen went dark. Charles turned to Zephyr, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. Counselor, tell your people to prepare their ships and transmit the coordinates to New Elysia. The UNSS Relentless will escort you to your new home. Zephyr clasped Charles's shoulders, overcome with gratitude. Captain, you have just saved my species. We will never forget this. Thank you. Charles assembled his senior staff and informed them of their new mission. Some seemed skeptical, but they trusted their captain. Within the hour, the Relentless and the battered Elysian fleet were ready to get underway, the first human ship to escort an alien civilization to a new world. As the ships prepared for FTL, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something momentous, the beginning of a new chapter for humanity on the galactic stage. He just hoped it would be a positive one, and that the Kelmthar wouldn't pick up their trail. Charles stared at the holographic star map, the angry red swirls of the Antares maelstrom dominating the display. Zephyr stood beside him, his face grim. The maelstrom is a treacherous region, Captain. Plasma storms, gravity wells, asteroid fields. It's a ship killer, the Elysian said, but it's also the only way to reach New Elysia without the Kelmthar intercepting us. Charles nodded. I've navigated my share of hazardous space. We'll get your people through safely, Counselor, I promise. Over the next several days, Charles worked closely with the Elysian navigators, poring over sensor data and stellar cartography to plot the safest possible route through the maelstrom. His years spent exploring the farthest reaches of human space proved invaluable, allowing him to spot potential dangers and steer the fleet clear. In between shifts, Charles made a point to visit the Elysian refugee ships, meeting with the survivors and learning their stories. Many spoke of unspeakable atrocities at the hands of the Kelmthar, families torn apart, entire cities razed, forced labor under brutal conditions. But they also shared tales of incredible bravery and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. One refugee in particular caught Charles' attention, a young boy named Jackson, who had lost his entire family in the uprising. The child sat huddled in a corner of the cargo bay, his eyes haunted and vacant. Charles approached him slowly, kneeling down to his level. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm Charles. What's your name?" The boy looked up, his gaze wary. "Jackson," he whispered. "Jackson, I know you've been through a lot, more than any kid should have to endure, but you're safe now, okay? I promise I won't let anything happen to you." Something in Charles's words seemed to reach Jackson. He uncurled slightly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Over the coming days, Charles spent every spare moment with Jackson, telling him stories of Earth and the wonders of the universe. Slowly but surely, the boy began to open up, even cracking a smile now and then. Charles felt a fierce protectiveness for Jackson, seeing in him shades of the child he had lost so long ago. As the fleet traversed deeper into the maelstrom, The dangers Zephyr had warned of began to manifest. A massive plasma storm engulfed the ships, ionized particles lashing at their shields and hulls. Alarms blared as the vessels were tossed about like toys, the storm threatening to tear them apart. Charles gripped the armrests of his command chair, his knuckles white. "All ships report." "Shields at 30%, Lieutenant Kira shouted over the din. "We can't take much more of this." "Counselor Zephyr, status of the Elysian fleet." Zephyr's voice crackled over the comm, strained but steady. "Holding together for now, but barely. We need to get out of this storm." Charles consulted the star map, his mind racing. There, a narrow corridor of relatively calm space, threading between two gravitational anomalies. It would be tight, but it was their only chance. "All ships, new heading 274 Mark 8. That's our ticket out of here." The fleet limped through the corridor, their shields flickering and hulls groaning under the strain. But they made it through, the ships emerging battered but intact on the other side of the storm. There was little time to catch their breath, however, as the long-range sensors soon lit up with a new threat. A dense asteroid field looming ahead, the space rocks ranging from the size of a shuttle to small moons. Charles could see the fear in his crew's eyes, but he refused to let it take hold. "We've come too far to let a bunch of rocks stop us now," he said firmly. "Helm, take us in. 1/4 impulse. Forward batteries. Shoot us a path." The Relentless and the Elysian ships slipped into the asteroid field, their weapons blasting away at the tumbling boulders. Despite their best efforts, several vessels sustained damage from glancing collisions, debris clattering off their hulls. Charles coordinated repair and rescue teams, working tirelessly to keep the fleet together. He even donned an EVA suit himself, venturing out to help seal a breach on one of the Elysian ships. As he welded the gash shut, buffeted by the stellar winds, he could feel the eyes of the refugees on him, their gratitude and respect palpable. Just as the fleet neared the edge of the maelstrom, their sensors blared a warning that turned Charles's blood to ice. A massive Kelmthar armada had entered the region behind them, closing fast. Their hunters had found them at last. Charles knew they'd never outrun the Kelmthar, not with their ships in such a battered state. He hailed Zephyr, his voice heavy with grim resolve. "Counselor, you need to take your people and go now. Get to New Elysia." Zephyr's eyes widened. "Captain, we can't leave you behind. The Kelmthar will destroy you." "If we all stay, they'll destroy us all," Charles countered. "The Relentless can hold them off long enough for you to get away. We're the only chance your people have at survival." Charles could see the anguish in Zephyr's face, the terrible weight of the decision before him. But at last the Elysian nodded. "We will never forget your sacrifice, Captain Johnson. Your name will be remembered among our people for generations." With a heavy heart, Charles watched the Elysian fleet jump away to safety, the sight of Jackson's tear-streaked face on the view screen searing into his memory. Then he turned to face the oncoming Kelmthar onslaught, the Relentless, ready to make her final stand. Charles gripped the armrests of his command chair as the Relentless shuddered under another barrage of Kelmthar fire. The view screen showed the enemy armada closing in, their ships bristling with weapons. "Shields at 20%, Kira shouted over the blaring alarms. "We can't take much more of this, Captain." Charles studied the tactical display, his mind racing. The Maelstrom's hazards, deadly to his own ship, could also be turned against their pursuers. "Helm, bring us about. Head for that plasma storm at bearing 2127 Mark 6. The Relentless veered hard to port, diving into the roiling tempest. Tendrils of superheated gas lashed at the shields, but Charles held their course steady. The Kelmthar ships, caught off guard by the sudden maneuver, barreled after them. "Now hard to starboard. Vent plasma from the nacelles." The Relentless pivoted, dumping a cloud of ionized particles in its wake, just as the lead Kelmthar cruiser entered the storm. The plasma ignited, engulfing the enemy ship in a fiery conflagration. It emerged a twisted wreck, secondary explosions rippling along its hull. Charles allowed himself a tight smile. One down, too many to go. The Relentless danced and weaved through the maelstrom, using the treacherous terrain to even the odds. They lured Kelnthar ships into asteroid fields, blasting the space rocks into clouds of razor-sharp shrapnel that shredded enemy hulls. They skimmed the edges of gravity wells, using the intense tidal forces to slingshot themselves away while the pursuers struggled against the crushing pull. Throughout it all, the crew of the Relentless fought with grim determination, pouring every ounce of skill and defiance into their efforts. They knew that if they fell here, the Elysians would be doomed. The fate of an entire species rested on their shoulders. Bit by bit, they whittled down the Kelnthar armada, destroying several ships outright and damaging dozens more. A lucky shot from the forward batteries even managed to cripple the enemy flagship, sending it listing away, trailing smoke and debris. But the victory was short-lived. The Relentless had not emerged unscathed from the brutal engagement. Alarms wailed as systems failed across the ship, the hull breached in a dozen places. In the flickering light of the bridge, Charles saw the weariness and desperation on his crew's faces. Kira's voice was strained as she delivered the grim report. "Shields are gone, Captain. Weapons are at 10% and falling. The reactor's leaking radiation. Engineering is barely keeping it contained." They were on their last legs. The Kelnthar, though bloodied, still vastly outnumbered them. It was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. Unless... Charles pulled up the tactical display again, his eyes falling on the massive Kelnthar battleship, at the heart of the armada. If they could take that behemoth out, it might just cripple the enemy fleet enough to give the Elysians a fighting chance. "Helm, plot a collision course with the Kelnthar flagship. Divert all remaining power to the engines." A shocked silence fell over the bridge. Kira spoke up, her voice trembling. "Sir, a collision at that speed, the Relentless won't survive." "I know." Charles met the eyes of his crew, seeing the fear and resignation reflected there. "But the Elysians will. If we can take out the flagship, it might just give them the opening they need to reach New Elysia." One by one he saw the acceptance settle over their faces. They knew what had to be done, for the Elysians, for the innocent lives they'd sworn to protect. As the crew made their grim preparations, a priority transmission suddenly burst through the static on the comms. Charles felt his heart seize at the sight of Jackson's terrified face. "Charles, I'm sorry, I couldn't leave you. I'm in the cargo bay. I snuck on board before we separated from the fleet." Charles cursed under his breath. Jackson, the boy who'd become like a son to him, who'd already lost so much, he couldn't bear the thought of him dying here too. He was torn, caught between his duty as a captain and his love for Jackson. How could he choose between the lives of his crew, the fate of the Elysians, and the child he'd sworn to protect? But before he could wrestle with that impossible choice, a shout from the sensor station shattered his anguished reverie. "Captain, there's some kind of anomaly forming off the port bow. It looks like a wormhole." Charles spun to the view screen, hope and disbelief warring within him. A massive rift in space had appeared, the stars warping and stretching around its swirling blue maw. And emerging from that cosmic maelstrom, ships. Dozens of ships bearing the unmistakable markings of the UNS fleet. Leading the charge was a massive dreadnought, its nameplate proudly displaying UNS Retribution. "Incoming transmission from the Retribution," Kira called out, her voice trembling with relief. The stern visage of Admiral Hawkins filled the view screen, his eyes alight with fierce determination. "Heard you could use a hand, Captain Johnson. Sorry we're late to the party." Charles felt a laugh bubble up from his chest, born of equal parts shock and sheer dizzying relief. "Admiral, I've never been so happy to see your ugly mug. How—" Hawkins allowed a small smile to crack his gruff exterior. "After our last chat, I went to High Command and raised 7 kinds of hell. Told them we couldn't just sit on our asses while an entire people faced extinction, that if we did nothing, we'd be betraying everything humanity stands for." The Admiral's face hardened, his gaze turning to the Kelnthar armada still besieging the Relentless. "Looks like we got here just in time. All ships, weapons free. Let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with our friends." The UNS fleet surged forward, fresh and spoiling for a fight. They tore into the Kelmthar ranks like wolves among sheep, the enemy ship still reeling and disorganized from the relentless, stubborn last stand. It was over in minutes. The once mighty Kelmthar armada lay broken and scattered, the survivors fleeing before the vengeful guns of the human ships. In the sudden, stunned silence that followed, Charles could only sit back in his chair, his mind struggling to process the whiplash turn of events. They'd been seconds away from death, grimly resigned to sacrificing themselves for the Elysians' slim chance at escape. And now? Now they had a future again. The Elysians were safe. Jackson was safe. The Relentless and her valiant crew had lived to fight another day. But even as relief washed over him, Charles knew this was only the beginning. The Kelmthar would not soon forget this humiliation, and humanity had just declared itself a player on the galactic stage in the most dramatic fashion possible. The repercussions of this day would echo far into the future for both their species. A new chapter was unfolding, one that would test the strength and resolve of human and Elysian alike. And Charles knew with a bone-deep certainty that he and his crew would be at the vanguard of that great and terrible journey. The Relentless floated in the void, a battered shell of its former self. Scorch marks marred its hull, a testament to the ferocity of the battle against the Kelmthar. Inside, the crew worked frantically to keep the ship together, but it was clear she wouldn't be making the long journey back to Earth any time soon. Charles limped onto the bridge, his uniform torn and stained with blood, some of it his own. He surveyed the damage with a grim eye. Consoles sparked and smoked, the view screen flickered with static. Kira looked up from her station, her face smudged with soot. "It's bad, Captain," she said. "Life support is stable for now, but the engines are shot. We're not going anywhere." Charles nodded, his jaw tight. "Get me Counselor Zephyr on the comm." Zephyr's face appeared on the screen, his expression a mix of relief and concern. "Captain Johnson, we can't thank you enough for what you've done, but your ship, will you be able to make it back to your homeworld?" Charles shook his head. "Not a chance. Looks like we're stuck with you for a while, at least until we can make repairs." Zephyr's eyes softened. "You and your crew are welcome on New Elysia for as long as you need. It's the least we can do after you saved us from annihilation." The journey to New Elysia was slow, the Relentless limping along under tow from the Elysian ships. When they finally arrived, Charles couldn't help but marvel at the sight. The Elysians had chosen well. The planet was a lush paradise, with sweeping green valleys and crystal-clear lakes. As the weeks turned into months, Charles and his crew worked side by side with the Elysians to build their new home. They helped erect shelters, plant crops, set up defenses. Charles spent much of his free time with Jackson, teaching the boy about Earth and the wonders of the universe. In the evenings they would sit together and watch the alien sunset, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. But even as bonds deepened between the two species, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Some of the Elysians, their minds still haunted by the cruelty of the Kelmthar, began to view the humans with distrust. Whispers spread through the colony. What if these outsiders turned on them like the Kelmthar had? What if this was all some elaborate trick? Charles did his best to quell these fears, meeting with the Elysian leadership and reaffirming humanity's commitment to their alliance. He organized joint projects and celebrations, trying to foster understanding and camaraderie between their peoples. But just as it seemed they were making progress, a terrible truth came to light. Elysians began falling ill with a mysterious sickness, their bodies racked with pain and fever. The disease spread like wildfire through the colony, sparing no one. In a desperate bid for answers, Charles and the Elysian scientists pored over the data, searching for a cause. What they found chilled them to the bone. The Kelmthar, in a final act of cruelty, had unleashed an engineered virus on New Elysia before their retreat. A biological weapon designed to eradicate the Elysians once and for all. The situation grew more dire by the day. The virus resisted all attempts at treatment, and more Elysians succumbed to its ravages. Jackson, the bright spark of hope in Charles's life, grew pale and weak, his small body burning with fever. With the Relentless finally repaired and ready to depart, Charles faced an impossible choice. He could return to Earth with his crew, leaving the Elysians to face this horror alone, or he could stay and fight for a cure, risking his own life in the process. In the end, there was no choice at all. Charles gathered his crew and told them of his decision. Those who wished to return to Earth could do so with his blessing, but he would remain on New Elysia for as long as it took to find a way to save the Elysians. He recorded a message for Admiral Hawkins, his voice rough with emotion, as he pleaded for humanity to stand with the Elysians in their darkest hour. He watched as the Relentless disappeared into the sky, carrying his words back to a distant Earth. Then he turned and walked back into the colony, to the small room where Jackson lay sleeping. He sat by the boy's bedside and took his hand, feeling the heat of the fever raging within. "I'm here, Jackson," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll beat this together, I promise you that." Outside, the stars wheeled in an alien sky, distant and uncaring. But in that small room, a bond had been forged that no distance or disease could break. A human and an Elysian, their fates now inextricably intertwined, facing an uncertain future together. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.